Welcome.
All right, now welcome as we welcome our guests as they come into the studio digitally. Let me remind our listeners that on Sunday, the gates at Napa will open at 4. You want to get into the auditorium by 4:30 because at that time, the Emancipation Support Committee will show 2 brief shorts, one on the life of Kwame Ture and one on Frantz Fanon. So this will take place prior to the lecture at 5. So we're inviting people from across the country who are coming to this event, the grand opening of the Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series, to come early, to come by 4:20, to be seated by 4:30, so they could benefit from the short films that will precede the lecture. Welcome, Daniel. Welcome, Mtima. Welcome to Indaba.
Good evening. Good evening. Thank you for having us.
Greetings.
All right. So let's start. Let's put this conversation right into its appropriate context, its contemporary context, before we get into solutions and so on. Of course, tonight we want to have a balanced discussion in terms of critiques and in terms of allowing ourselves to discuss the potential approaches that we have developed, that we're aware of, that could solve the issue. But we are in an environment right now where powerful forces in the country, the highest level, are exploring the El Salvador option. Citizens are being encouraged to arm themselves and hanging. There are attempts to resume hangings, and of course the criminalization of students for fighting at schools. All of these policy positions seem to be based on punitive approaches to crime and violence prevention. And perhaps we could say that they are even a stark departure from the public health approach that CARICOM leaders would have signed on to just 2 years ago. Danielle, perhaps you could start. We'd start with you.
Okay, so I note, like the rest of Trinidad and Tobago, our troubling approach to a return to a more aggressive approach to crime. But I think it's a reflection of a heightened uncertainty that we're experiencing in our community. And we are grappling for very quick fixes to a long-term problem that we're not willing to invest in amply. We're not willing to take the time with amply. And my hope is that all of the things that are put on the table are just the initial salvo, and that our current administration is willing to come to the table with different community and groups that have been dealing with these things on a more organic level to have a wider conversation about solutions.
Right. Tima, brother, Sister Danielle is hoping that what we are hearing about here are sort of the knee-jerk initial reactions of the current administration, and that perhaps once they have an opportunity to give things more thought, we're going to start to hear something more, a more collaborative approach will emerge. What say you, brother?
Yes, good evening everyone again. So I too also agree. Now, you all will be familiar with the Citizen Security Program, right? It was out of the Ministry of National Security, and they had also adopted that public health approach to crime. Now, when the Kamala administration came into power, the first time, what the Prime Minister had done, she had expanded CSP across 20, now interestingly, 22 communities in East Port of Spain alone. And that was because we had the problem of the Rasta city, Muslim city conflict. And as a result of that, you had Nelson Street split into upper and lower. Same thing with Duncan. You had George. You had splits within Quarry Street. So she had expanded CSP into, they got 22 communities inside of there, right? And that worked until the former administration came in, and then, well, CSP has been scratched, right? So I'm hoping that she looks back at that model, right? Bring back that CSP model, that Citizen Security Program, which had the Project Reason, right? There was a project called Project Reason, which used the public health approach that used the model from the Cure Violence out of Chicago, and that worked in the East Palestine area. The report is there in IDB, right? It's online. People could go and check it. That program had worked when it was established. It is no more. So I'm hoping that they could revisit that. I'm also hoping that they could meet with stakeholders who also doing the work on the ground, like yourselves, like our groups. There are many other NPOs that actually do a lot of work, not just in the school, but in the communities. And let's come together with a collaborative approach. What you find happening, Dr. Fergus and Shabaka and my colleague Daniel, we work in silos. So Roots Fund, and we work with grants. So we get a grant to run a 6 months program, a 9 months program, right? And at the end of that program, that's it. Because the life of the program is the life of the grant, the award of the grant. If we could get that state support to have a sustained program, because we cannot want to solve school violence in 6 weeks, 6 months, 9 months, right? We have to have a sustained program working with these children along the way. So that's what I would say for now, and let the discussion kind of develop some more.
Yeah, Brother Mtima, I mean, you raise a very interesting question there. It seems that perhaps the last regime has to take some responsibility for the current heightened, reality, the current statistics around crime and violence because of its own hardline approach, which undermined what was there before. I don't know, Daniel, you have your ear close to the ground. How do you feel about this particular, this assertion?
I think that would be a very narrow view of looking at where this problem came from. I think whether you deal with the previous UNC administration, the previous PNM administration, there were programs that were good in both, and there were programs that were problematic. The framework of the solutions are there. It's even incorporated into the social services, into police, youth clubs. The frameworks are there. However, what all of the frameworks are missing is what Brother Intimo was talking about, is support. We can't have a children's authority with children's home that take children out of problematic homes and environment and then put them in a home and underfund the homes, and have the phone homes having to look for private funding in order to ensure that staff and food and those things are available. We can't have programs that start for 6 months and end when in truth and in fact within the fabric of both national security and the social development programs, there are already pre-existing programs that already address some of these issues. What we need to do is coordinate the support and the services, and probably be a little more creative and out of the box in our thinking, and bring in the community groups into social development and these types of institutions, and see how it is we could operationalize the things that work and tweak and get rid of the things that don't work. And then we also have to look at the restructuring of our environment. There are minimal or reduced public spaces for families and children to go out and safely engage, safely exercise. Our public spaces are being eaten up constantly by commercial ventures, and we have to find a balance for that. We have shagaramas. When I was a child, we used to get on the bus. We live Barataria, and we would get on the bus in Port of Spain and go down to shagaramas, bathe, and enjoy the seafront. And it was easy access for those of us who did not have private transportation. Now, those accesses are being eroded, they're being monetized, and more families have to depend on non-public transport in order to get to some of these places. So we have to look and be a little more creative and go a little wider in our solutions, because the frameworks are there. What is absent is a consistent funding or even will, to some extent, to support the things that work and work well.
Yeah, Brother M. Timo, Sister
Yes.
Danielle is suggesting that there are blueprints that already exist that need to be supported, analyzed, and supported, based on their track record. That seems to correspond with what you were saying earlier.
Yeah. No, I know we're speaking about looking at us the school violence and stuff like that, but that program, that citizen security program, right? Where when I started to work with CSP back in 2015, right? I looked at CSP as behind the scenes. So let me explain that. I attended Serval and I worked at Serval, right? So let's say Serval is the movie, and then behind the scenes of the movie, that was CSP, because we were actually in the homes, we were in the communities, we were where those children came from. And the thing about that citizen security program, it allowed the residents to shape how they want their community to be. A big problem we have, especially with school violence. We want to address school violence, but the four of us as adults discussing what's best for the children, what's best for the school. And we're not involving the children in that discussion, because, as we have our PhD and MSc, and we're bright. So we don't need to hear from them. Let me just share, if I can, a very successful program we had run in 4 schools, right? And the program is called Aim High. We like acronyms, right? So it's amazing, intelligent, motivated. Aim. Healing inwardly, growing happily, high. And it was about reducing school violence. And we asked the children, because we are not fighting in school, you are fighting in school, how to reduce school violence. Some of the children said, they jump up one time, well, Miss don't come to class. We say, why Miss doesn't come to class? Because of us. I say, well then, how are you fixing that? You saying Miss not coming to class because of you. How are you fixing that? And in a nutshell, the children came up with this solution. They say, sir, Miss and them have problems. We have problems too. These are the children said, let us do a program addressing trauma. We brought in a professional counseling psychologist. He did 2 sessions with the students. We did 4 sessions with the teachers. And then the last 2 sessions, we combined the students and the teachers. And audience, my colleagues here on this call, people started to cry. Children cry. Hello, it was interesting. It was amazing. Because why? The children were right. All of us had problems. And the school now became a battleground, not between students and students, but between teachers and students, not physically fighting, but missing coming to class because only get in trouble, this and that. And those 4, 2, and 2. 8 sessions. 8 sessions. It didn't solve the entire problem, but it brought to the fore that miss and them, and I'm using miss and them because the children said miss and them. Who do you all think the them were? The children said miss and them. Who is the them? Any one of you all?
The them?
Yeah.
The other administrators, the other people in authority, perhaps?
Miss and them, the them was sirs. The only time the students will call Dr. Ferguson by his name is if he impacted their life positively. All the other male teachers, they refer to them as them. And that, to me, speaks volume as to the absence of males in those children's lives, that they dismiss that male authority as them. But like them. But it's miss and them.
So, Tima, what comes across very clearly is that in your experience, the issue is much more profound than we would first imagine. There's something deeper here at issue. This is not, we can't import a solution from abroad or from somewhere else. We have something taking place here within our society, something. We have issues here that have roots here that need to be explored and understood if we are to move forward. Is that what you're getting?
Yeah, no. Look, no, the public health approach, that cure violence model, right? That's out of Chicago. But guess what? We adapted that to our climate.
Yeah, I'm saying that when you went in, what you just told me there, when you went into those schools and you had those discussions, it seems to me that what your results indicate that there's something deeper going on that is not just among students, not just among teachers, but the whole interplay of teachers, students, the education system, the communities. It seems to me that you have uncovered something much deeper than one would first imagine.
Yeah, and yes, and listen, that's just one of the schools. The other school, the children said to us, "Sir, we need to see how we behaving." I said, "What do you mean?" "Sir, if we get to see how we just behave, you check yourselves. We brought in a professional drama team to do playback theater, right? And the children came up with these scenarios, and some of the scenarios included mommy coming in school to fight. And the team now demonstrated that, paused and told the children, okay, how we could fix this scenario. And the children gave suggestions. Well,
yeah, let's get into concrete, Tima, because you've raised the issue there. The last major incident of violence, which precipitated this conversation nationally, what was his name? It was Ian Allen interviewed the mother of the child who was seriously injured in the incident. And two things came out. One is that she had spent 2 years, talking to the authorities at the school about the problem before the incident took place, which raises the question of the authorities there and their complicity in the final outcome. And two was that she identified that the parents themselves, different members of the community, were having issues which were mirrored in the behavior of the children, so that the issues that manifested themselves among the children had their genesis in arguments and fights that were taking place among parents.
Yes, and on that's the one with the sisters, or I don't say half sisters.
This is the incident where the young lady was
in the toilet,
to the extent where she had to have surgery. It was on video,
right.
It was on TV.
So the stepfather said that, and that started out of the school, online, a home situation came into the school. Yes, so listen, it is never a one issue. Is multi-pronged. There's never,
Yeah.
and we cannot take a one side of, as Daniel was saying, approach to whether it's violence at school or violence at home. We have to
But
look
you
at
see,
all the factors.
that's the thing though. It's
Yeah,
easy. I think it's very easy. And I think there's a bit of laziness on our part to hyper focus on the children. Our children are a reflection of us. And there is violence in our society across the board. There's violence in places of employment,
yeah,
workplace bullying is on a record high. There's violence in the schools in terms of tertiary education. There's violence across the board, and our children are just a little reflection back at us of what it is we are putting into this space, and they're absorbing it, and we are expecting them to respond better to the stimulus of violence than we respond ourselves from the way we speak to each other on social media. I think the last election cycle, the discourse on social media was extremely instructive in how easily it was for us to be nasty and
oh yeah,
mean
attack one
and
another.
deprecating to each other, for to absolute strangers. Now you
Yeah,
take that into the homes. Do we think that these deprecating, abusive words and conduct is limited to social media? It's happening in the homes. And then when it is we demand, or just taking an old adage, when the boss pressure the husband, and the husband now has to get an outlet, he's pressuring the wife. When the wife has to get an outlet, now she is pressuring the children, and the child only outlet is the animals.
yeah, kick up the
So
dog.
it's a trickle down situation, and we are so
Yes,
Let
hyper
me bring in
focused on.
Dr. Fergus here. Doc,
yeah.
is there a historical explanation for this? Is there a historical way to
Of
view
course,
this?
Tabaka, of course. Our history is one of violence. We have never dealt with that aspect of our history, and what we are seeing is a continuation of that. So I agree with Ntima that the problem is systemic, it's structural, it's also historical, and therefore stopgap measures cannot resolve the problem. We must really aim for sustained and institutional strategies. But I want to ask a specific question, gendered question. Antima touched on it in terms of the mother he mentioned, in terms of the girls. Now, physical violence is generally associated with males for various reasons, might be hormonal, might be cultural, might be historical. So crimes of or crimes with a deadly or brutal force, physical violence, is really a progression of youth violence. That's how I see it, besides the historical phenomenon. But most of the school fighters that feature on social media are girls. And so I'm wondering if we are missing something, if it is that girls are more frequently highlighted and not that they are more um, frequently engaged in fighting. But definitely, if we judge from social media, from years gone back, it's not just recent. To me, it's almost always girls that are featured in these fights. Perhaps Daniel could shed some light on that. Why girls? Are we missing something? Is it the home again that we are coming back to? Is it the general violence in society? But why girls? Why girls? Could Daniel have shed some light on that?
Dr. Fergus, you are asking me to opine on something that I would rather not from a gender perspective. But I think what we could look at is the fact that women tend to be the some of the the larger receivers or recipients of violence, whether it be mental, physical, emotional violence, women tend to be that recipient. I think what happened is the girls tend to be, at least this is my presumption, on social media just a little bit more, and they tend to be a little bit more tech savvy, especially in terms of the manipulation and the maneuvering of social media, that their activities um tend to be highlighted. And then I think it is a shock to the society, a very patriarchal society, that assumes that this level of physical violence is not natural to girls. But it could it be that it wasn't identified, highlighted, or even really talked about seriously prior to now, like it is now, because we have visual evidence in our neighborhood, in social economically depressed area. Women always was cussing by the standpipe, getting into fisticuff over sometimes domestic, sometimes partner violence, and it was always dismissed as, you know, them women and them and how they are and they're emotional and that type of thing. But now, as we have more language, we have more proof of the violent capacity that women also possess, and we see them acting out in these areas. I think it's really more of a shock to our patriarchal sensibilities than it is that girls are now hyper violent versus what they were before. At least that's my opinion.
Yeah,
So
that's a little insert there. There's a historical dimension to that as well. During the days of slavery, the people who were most feared by the drivers were not the men, you know, it was a woman. And that is widely reported that the drivers were more likely to be cornered and beaten by women. So this fighting spirit had been there for quite a long time. It's not something recent. And we shouldn't be afraid to speak to the truth. Whether, I mean, it might be uncomfortable. I'm not blaming one gender or the other, just observing a phenomenon and trying to get some explanation for it.
yeah, and one
Well,
of the schools we worked
brother,
in,
and Timo, wait, before
interestingly,
you continue, let me just
yeah,
there is a let me just
yeah.
first get, do you agree or acknowledge the observation that Dr. Fergus has made, which Daniel already has endorsed, that perhaps there
Yes.
is a overrepresentation of women in the violence?
Well, I
Girls, sorry.
no, one of the schools we worked in, interestingly, a school of I think that about 800 or 900 students, and the majority of the fights, if not almost all, were from the girls. Even the fellas and all was saying, the boys and them were saying, sir, them girls real bad here, you know, and a lot of the fights that to the no, long ago.
This brings up a further question.
No, just
Sorry,
listen
brother,
to
and
this,
Timo, go on.
and this is interesting to you all because my wife is a school teacher, and I told my wife about this. So a girl came to us one of the sessions. She was fighting. She said she and a group of girls fought. Now, again, in my mind, when we know girls fighting is all for boys. So she started to explain to me, sir, let me explain to you. It's this girl I like. And then it's like, and yes, I was a bit shocked. I don't think I showed it on my face, but she was looking for a response. She said, so what happened? Why are you looking so? I said, no, I'm paying attention. I want to hear what you're saying. And I tried my best to keep a very straight face. And when she explained to me how this whole fight erupted, I went to her and I told my wife, I said, listen, we have to look at these fights with a different lens now. Because you might pull in the 2 girls for fighting and you might start off, books and boys don't mix. And nothing to do with boys. It had to do with their emotions, their feelings for somebody else who is not a boy. And I brought up that because we have to look, addressing these things is not straightforward, right? Because, again, all of us will think that books and boys don't mix. No, it's books and boys or books and girls, right? Because that particular girl said the big fight in the school was over girls, right? So we may pull them in the office, reprimand them, and never address the issue because we feel it's Shabaka they're fighting over. When is Daniel?
Sounds to me like something of a quaint issue that you're raising there. But let's stay within the genre for a minute and let's ask some more questions. Is there a predominance of violence? We've already established, at least from yourself, from the observation of Dr. Fergus, from Daniel's observation, from your experience in the schools, that there seems to be a preponderance of girls involved in the fighting. Is there also a preponderance of African girls in particular? And perhaps, and if that is so, what might it say about our community? Because I would imagine that some other communities would find this conversation a bit strange. Let me start with you, Daniel.
Well, we had to look at this from two perspectives. It could be that there is a overwhelming amount of this behavior in our community, but to there is a, as Dr. Fergus said, there's a historical context to that, and we can't ignore the fact that our community still faces a certain amount of discrimination and systemic racism and ignorances that it comes with its own amount of violence. So we are responding to the stimuli that is placed upon us that may not be placed upon another group. So there is that perspective. But then there's another perspective of us being over policed. So it could be that in some areas that it may be happening in other communities and it is being dealt with in a different way. It's not being tolerated, but it is being approached more tenderly, more systemically, going at it from a more social awareness aspect of it, and dealing with the family and the whole and that type of thing. Whereas when it comes to us, even when it is the teachers and the people around us, it is coming from a more punitive, a more punishment perspective. Because when it is you come in and you see two girls, especially two darker skinned girls, fighting, there are biases that are going to immediately kick in, whether you acknowledge it or not, that you are going to assume a lot of things about why, how, what they have come to this position that you wouldn't automatically do if you see, let's say, two of our Venezuelan counterparts, or let's say two of our East Indian counterparts. You are not going to give them the kind of grace that you would have given to somebody who is not Black. And therefore, your response to them is going to be different than your response to the others. So I am resistant to make it a community impact, a community-wide problem or endemic to the community. And if it is endemic to the community, the question that we have to ask is, what are the stimuli that is applied to this community that is not applied to other communities? And we have to be very real about what those stimuli are and how it impacts the community.
Those are great questions, Daniel. Let me just acknowledge before we go to MTMA and Dr. Fergus that there is definitely a difference in visibility between schools in certain communities and other schools. We know for a fact that some of these schools that are considered prestige schools do have issues of violence among their students as well. But for whatever reason, they very rarely make it into the public domain. So let me acknowledge that, and then we will go now to Brother Mtima, and then to you, Dr. Fergus, on this question.
I well said, Daniel. I worked silver for 15 years and had the opportunity of working Spree Simon, and I saw the indiscipline among some of the students of a particular demographic. I worked Beetham Gardens, same thing. And then I went to El Socorro to work in Silval. And was a different demographic of children misbehaving compared to what I saw on the Beetham and Spree Simon, which is John John. Then I went to Shogunas. So, and I agree with Daniel in terms of we are more policed. I have an experience at Spree Simon. There was a Muslim student, and I was so hard on her for her misbehavior, for as I might say, her haram behavior. And a senior instructor told me, say, Mtima, that is an adolescent child behaving how any other adolescent child would behave. He said, your problem is, in your mind, she disrespecting your religion. So you're coming down hard on her, then you will come down on the other adolescent child with the same behavior. And I said, yeah, boy, that makes sense. Right? And so that I agree with Daniel when she said, we are police more, right? Because, hello, I've seen indiscipline with Indian children. If you have a Chinese child in Silval, it's across the board. But yes, as you said, Shabaka, we are more visible, right? We are more visible in terms of who looking also, eh? Who looking? Shabaka, you're mute, Shabaka, you're mute.
Let me just be clear, Mtima. I'm not saying that to in any way excuse our own misconduct or to try to diminish the misconduct that's coming from our community.
No,
I just want to make it very clear that I have my own personal experience with these matters, and I'm very closely aware that what makes it to the media is not a full reflection of what is actually taking place in the society. Dr. Fergus, let's bring the question now to you. This question of the place of African girls and women, in this conversation on school violence.
Yeah, well, that's a fact. I think it's a well-recognized fact that in terms of prejudice, particularly racial prejudice, but we can combine with class prejudice. When it comes to racial prejudice, right, Black people are the worst affected, and within that Black demographic, women are even, worse affected than men. So yes, I agree with that we have to consider that racial element, but we have to consider the class element, and even the religious element might also kick into the picture. Remember, we are in a cosmopolitan society, and all these things affect the reactions of state authorities and other authorities to deviance and other kinds of misdemeanors. But I just want to mention one thing because we are approaching closing time. Not necessarily a question, but I wonder if what might be playing out in some respects is not a sort of consciousness by the most oppressed group of people in the Caribbean, the Africans, consciousness of multiple injustices that they are reacting to impulsively or reflectively, and therefore demonstrating an inability to display restraint, which might lead back to socialization. Could that be part of the dynamic playing out there, that if you repress, your emotions, you cannot find solutions or even understanding to the problems that are affecting you? And we do talk about generational trauma and all these things. We mention those words and we don't try to understand how they impact, day-to-day behaviors, particularly in situations like this. That you explode. Is it that you're really violent, or that, is something subliminal that is driving you into some kind of action that you yourself probably don't even understand? Perhaps Ntima might be able to explain some of that for us from his observations.
Well,
those are just some wild thoughts of mine, but you can comment on them.
Well, brother, before Brother Ntima comes in, let me just make the point that we live in a part of the world where the the long-standing historical violence, that has played out here has not yet been properly acknowledged. So and once you do not acknowledge your violent past, you cannot address it in any way. So I'm not surprised that and when you look at the general crime statistics that we have in the region, and the crime, homicides per capita, and so on, where we fit in to the global picture, the absurdly high um, uh, you know um, murder statistics that we have per capita, in relation to the rest of the world, it is not surprising that we are a society that has not yet adequately acknowledged our own violent past, and really done enough to address the legacy of that past in the society. Let me just quickly, as we come into the close here, we have Yoruba woman suggesting that women have always had a warrior spirit. However, what has happened now is that the warrior spirit is being misdirected and misused. And Nigel Collins has just written that anti-blackness is so rampant across TNT, even within the black community, that serious intervention is needed. So we have two comments from the floor. Brother M. Tima, you, and then Sister Danielle.
Well, I want to go back to what Daniel had said earlier, in terms of our society and violence. And when she was speaking, my mind ran on not attacking the individual, but one of our social media influencers. Some of his skits now are about violence between two neighbors, and we create humor and comedy, right, over violence. And my wife will know that I do not like, I don't find it funny, jokes about domestic violence. And we have some comedians who will go on a stage and talk about how they beat their wife, and big slap and kick, and the audience will laugh. And so we have to pay attention to these subliminal messages that, not just subliminal, no, boy, that we send to these young people, and then when they want to fight with cutlass and belt and this and that, then we frown on them. But we really have to pay attention to how we deal with violence within the society itself, because violence cannot be humorous, right? Be it on a social media skit or on a stand-up comedy stage. It cannot be humorous.
Yeah, well, Brother Mtima is already moving to a kind of the approach that we should take to these issues. The seriousness. I think he's trying to impress upon us the seriousness that we have to approach these issues with. But of course, we're still talking about the depth and profundity of the issue. Danielle, you have your closing remarks now. We're coming down to the end of the program.
Okay, so I want to address what Dr. Fergus said and then Ntima said. I do agree with Dr. Fergus that we do have and we are playing out what our history and our contemporary faces. Um, it's putting us into the stimulus that we were put into, that brought us here, and continues to maintain us without addressing it. And I think one of the things that we could do to begin to address it is we can have more state-sponsored spaces where these conversations are happening more and more within the community. So we can address not only the historical violence, but we could also get the input of the man on the ground who is most impacted by this violence and other things to put in their 2 cents in how we could fix it and how we could address it, because they have very good solutions to the problems that they are exposed to on a daily basis. In terms of Brother Intima, I am very wary of editing or censoring art. I do agree with you that violence should never be funny, but I don't think that the way to censor art, because art is usually a reflection of what our society holds either dear or sacrosanct and that type of thing. So I think we could use the art and what people find funny or engage in as a barometer of where we are at this point. And if it is, we use that as a barometer, we know we have a lot of work to do. And we can use that same art and use it as a teaching tool and a teaching technique for both our children and our parents, because I think parents, part of what we need to do to prepare parents for being parents in the regional authorities is to do some parenting classes in terms of the social elements of it and include some of these things. Why are these things wrong? What's the problem? What do you see? And you start to collect an idea of how people see themselves and how they see the ways that they could change, just as you did with the children. Let's begin to do that with the adults by creating these spaces where these adults could have these conversations and the conversations could manifest into programs and solutions.
Thank you, Daniel. Dr. Fergus, you want to guide us?
I well, I wouldn't want to add to that except to say that we have to move beyond talk to more systematic action, because we can keep talking forever. I know some of you, Daniel and Timo, you are doing your bit, but as I think we all agree this evening, there must be some governmental support, and that support must be institutionalized so that it would be sustained and survive transitions of government. Because if it is not institutionalized, then it means that when governments change, programs might come to an end, and then you're back to square one. So we have to fight for that. And somebody, I think earlier in the program, talked about advocacy. Perhaps that's one of the strategies to develop, that the voices need to be made more public and compel the authorities to listen. So that's my final thoughts for this evening.
Yes. And of course, I support Dr. Fergus 100% in the notion of action, but I do not, I don't want us to diminish the importance of the dialogue, because the action, well-intentioned action that is not based in a proper understanding of the reality of the situation, may not really advance our cause. So we need to continue to have these conversations where we can deepen our understanding of the issues with people like Dr. Fergus, who have a historical background, with sociologists and others who have studied these issues carefully. One of the things we're going to do for future programs is we're going to study the reports on school violence, at least from the Caribbean Freedom Project. We intend to go through the reports very carefully to see what we could glean, to decide how we will intervene in these issues going forward. So we will share that information with the public as we analyze these reports to see what is in there that could be of value for us, or maybe has been overlooked, maybe hasn't been looked at carefully enough, based and of course including the conversations we've had here on Indaba in those issues. So, Brother Mtima, Sister Danielle, I want to thank you for joining us tonight here on Indaba. I want to thank all our listeners, those who've shared their comments on social media, those who joined us on 91.1, and of course those who are going to tune in tomorrow and watch this program at home via the ESC's YouTube channel or whatever other media they choose to utilize. Enjoy Indaba and join us again next week, Wednesday, for another edition of this program, the place where knowledge grows, the place to find consensus, the voice of the people, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee. And don't forget this weekend, Drum Festival on Saturday, launch of the Kwame Ture Memorial Lecture Series on Sunday. Good night.
Good night.